The Texas sun hung low over Fort Sentinel, turning the dust on the access road into something close to gold. A silver sedan rolled to a stop at the main gate, engine ticking as it cooled. The woman who stepped out wore jeans that had seen better days, a faded gray hoodie with the sleeves pushed up to her elbows, and boots that looked like they'd walked through half the Middle East. Nothing about her screamed military. Nothing turned heads. The guard in the booth barely glanced up from his clipboard. He was young, maybe 22, with the kind of fresh face that hadn't seen anything worse than a long shift in the Texas heat. He took her ID card, scanned it without reading the name, and waved her through with the enthusiasm of a man counting down to lunch. Behind him, two soldiers leaned against the concrete barrier, nursing paper cups of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. One of them, a corporal with a smirk that seemed permanently attached to his face, watched the woman pass and shook his head. "Another temp clerk," he said, loud enough for her to hear. "How many does that make this month?" The other soldier laughed, the sound dry and bitter. "4, maybe 5. Logistics is bleeding people faster than we can replace them. This one probably won't last 2 weeks." The woman didn't slow down, didn't turn around, didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. She just kept walking, one hand adjusting the strap of a single duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Her eyes moved across the base like she was reading a language only she understood. The cracked asphalt, the faded paint on the hangar doors, the vehicles parked in neat rows with flat tires and hoods propped open like broken promises. She saw everything, and she remembered everything. Because Colonel Nora Blackwell had been trained to notice what others missed. Trained to assess, calculate, and act. Trained in places where a single overlooked detail could get good people killed. But nobody at Fort Sentinel knew that. To them, she was just another civilian hire, another warm body to fill a desk until the paperwork crushed her spirit and she walked away like all the others. They had no idea who had just walked through their gate. The image hit her without warning. A flash of memory so vivid, it felt like the Texas heat had turned into Afghan sun. Kandahar Province, summer of 2019. Convoy rolling through a narrow valley with walls of rock on both sides. The terrain screamed ambush with every instinct she possessed. She'd been riding in the lead MRAP, radio in one hand and a laminated map in the other. Captain then, 24 years old and already running logistics for an entire task force. The first RPG had come from the ridgeline, trailing smoke like a comet. It missed the lead truck by 3 feet and detonated against the cliff wall, showering the convoy with shrapnel and dust. Then the world had exploded. Small arms fire from both sides, mortars walking up the valley floor, chaos spilling through the radio as every vehicle called in contact at once. And she'd done what she'd been trained to do. Cut through the noise, prioritized, gave orders in a voice that didn't shake even when the world was burning. Victor 2-6, suppress North Ridge. Victor 3-1, move your vehicle forward and create cover for the dismounts. Medevac, I need you airborne in 5 minutes or we're going to lose people. They'd fought their way out. Every truck. Every soldier. She'd earned a silver star that day. They'd pinned it on her chest in a ceremony she barely remembered, and she'd locked it in a box back in her quarters, because medals didn't bring back the ones you couldn't save. But one face haunted her more than the others. Captain Lena Fairchild, her best friend. The woman who'd taught her that logistics wasn't just about moving boxes, it was about keeping soldiers alive. Lena had died in an ambush 3 years later. Different convoy, different valley, same preventable failure. Equipment that never arrived. Maintenance that was never done. Someone, somewhere, hadn't cared enough to do their job right. Nora had sworn at Lena's funeral that it would never happen again. Not on her watch. That's why she was here. The memory faded as quickly as it had come, leaving her standing on the sidewalk outside Building 6, headquarters for the 3rd Sustainment Brigade. The building looked exactly like 100 others she'd seen. Gray concrete, glass doors that reflected the sky but never seemed clean. A sign out front with peeling letters that hadn't been updated since the Obama administration. She pulled the door open and stepped into a lobby that smelled like burnt coffee and old paperwork. The woman behind the reception desk looked up as Nora approached. Specialist 4th class, according to the name tape. Riley. Early 20s with dark circles under her eyes and the slumped posture of someone who'd stopped caring about military bearing somewhere around month 2 of this assignment. Help you? Riley asked, fingers already moving back toward her keyboard. Nora slid a thin folder across the desk. Reporting for duty, civilian hire, logistics support. Riley opened the folder without interest, scanned the first page, and reached for the phone. She punched in a 3-digit extension and waited, eyes already drifting back to whatever YouTube video she'd been watching before Nora walked in. Ma'am, your new GS7 is here. A pause. Yeah, the one from the temp agency? Another pause, longer this time. Copy that. She hung up and slid a temporary badge across the desk. It was white plastic with visitor printed in red letters across the top, the kind of badge that screamed, "You don't belong here," louder than any words could. 3rd floor, room 312, Riley said. Major Calloway's office. Elevator's down, so you'll have to take the stairs. Thank you, Nora said. Riley was already back on her phone. The stairwell echoed with each footstep. 3 flights up, past walls painted in that particular shade of institutional beige that existed nowhere in nature. Someone had tried to brighten things up with a motivational poster on the 2nd floor landing. Excellence is not a destination, it's a journey. Somebody else had drawn a mustache on the soldier in the photo. Room 312 was at the end of a hallway that smelled like toner and stress. The door stood half open, voices spilling out in a low hum of controlled chaos. Nora paused just outside, listening. I'm telling you, if we don't get those generator parts by Friday, the motor pool is going to have my head on a pike. A woman's voice, tight with exhaustion and frustration. Motor pool is going to have to wait, a man replied. His voice carried decades of watching promises turn into disappointments. We've got 6 units waiting on comms equipment that's been in transit for 3 months. That takes priority. Everything takes priority, Brennan. That's the problem. We're drowning in priorities and nobody's actually swimming. Nora knocked. Twice. Firm, but not aggressive. The conversation stopped. Come in, the woman called. The logistics office looked like a war zone, and not the kind Nora was used to. Desks crammed together in rows that made no ergonomic sense, computer monitors glowing with spreadsheets that seemed to scroll forever, stacks of paper leaning at angles that defied physics. A printer in the corner grinding like it had given up on life, but nobody had told it to stop. Half a dozen soldiers and civilians looked up as Nora entered. Most of them looked right through her, eyes already returning to whatever crisis had their attention before she interrupted. But one woman stood in the center of it all like the eye of a hurricane. Major Iris Calloway was somewhere in her late 30s, with auburn hair pulled into a regulation bun that had started to come loose around the edges. Her uniform was crisp, her ribbons perfectly aligned, but the skin under her eyes told the real story. Dark circles, stress lines bracketing her mouth. She looked like someone holding back a flood with nothing but willpower and stubbornness. You must be Blackwell, Calloway said. It wasn't really a question. Yes, ma'am. Calloway's eyes flicked to the temporary badge clipped to Nora's hoodie, then back up to her face. There was a moment of assessment there, the way a combat medic sizes up a casualty to decide if they're worth the time to save. Welcome to the circus, Calloway said. I'd give you the full orientation, but I don't have time, and you probably wouldn't believe half of it anyway. She turned and gestured toward an empty desk, shoved into the corner near a window that overlooked the motor pool. That's yours. Computer password is taped under the keyboard because our IT section is about as functional as our supply chain. She paused, seemed to weigh her next words carefully. We lost 2 people last month, Calloway continued. Burnout. One of them actually cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes before she turned in her resignation. The other just stopped showing up. So if you're looking for a nice, quiet government job where you can coast to retirement, you should probably leave now and save us both the paperwork. Nora met her eyes, didn't blink. I don't quit easily, ma'am. Something flickered across Calloway's face. Not quite hope, more like the faint memory of what hope used to feel like. We'll see, she said, Sergeant Brennan will get you set up. Try to keep your head above water for at least the first week." She turned back to her desk, already reaching for the phone that had started ringing again. The man who walked over had the build of someone who'd spent his youth doing things that broke lesser men. Sergeant First Class Wyatt Brennan was probably mid-30s, with short blonde hair and a face weathered by too many deployments in too many deserts. His uniform was immaculate, boots polished to mirrors, but his eyes held the distant focus of someone who'd seen too much and couldn't forget any of it. "Brennan," he said, offering his hand. "Communications and IT, which means I spend most of my time explaining to officers why their equipment doesn't work and listening to them blame me for it." Nora shook his hand. His grip was firm, professional. "You know your way around Army requisition systems?" he asked. "Some," Nora said. "Good, because ours is held together with duct tape and prayers." He gestured toward the computer on her desk. "You'll be working mostly with GCSS Army. It's supposed to make logistics easier. In reality, it's like trying to perform surgery with a hammer." He pulled up a chair and logged into her computer, fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "Here's what you need to know," he said. "Every requisition has to go through at least 4 approval levels. Each level takes between 3 days and forever. If anything gets kicked back for corrections, you start over from scratch. The system crashes at least twice a week, and whatever timeline they promised you, multiply it by 3. Nora leaned forward, watching the screen. "What's the biggest backlog right now?" Brennan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Pick a category. Communications equipment, 6 months behind. Vehicle parts, 8 months. Generator components, Major Calloway's been trying to get those for almost a year." "Why?" "Because the system's broken," he said simply. "Has been for years. We submit requests, they disappear into the bureaucracy. Something shows up 6 months later that's the wrong part, wrong model, wrong everything. By then, the unit that needed it has either deployed or found a workaround. So we start over." He stood up, stretching his back with a grimace that suggested old injuries that never quite healed. "You seem like you might actually care," Brennan said. "That's either going to make you very good at this job, or it's going to break your heart. Maybe both." The first few hours passed in a blur of passwords, training modules, and orientation paperwork that existed solely to protect the Army from liability. Nora worked through it with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd filled out 1,000 forms in 100 different bases. But she wasn't really focused on the forms. She was watching. The way Calloway moved through the office, constantly putting out fires, but never actually solving the underlying problems. The way Brennan checked and rechecked the same equipment logs like he didn't trust his own eyes anymore. The way the civilian contractors at the desks near the door had stopped even pretending to care, scrolling through their phones while the work piled up around them. This wasn't chaos. Chaos was random. Chaos was the fog of war, the unpredictable nature of combat where good plans fell apart the moment bullets started flying. This was something worse. This was a system that had slowly, quietly given up. A death by 1,000 cuts. Forms that led nowhere. Requests that vanished. Promises made and broken so many times that nobody even bothered to get angry anymore. She'd seen it before. Different bases, different units, same story. And she'd been sent here to figure out why. The mission brief had been short, delivered by a 2-star general in a Pentagon office that smelled like furniture polish and old leather. "Fort Sentinel is failing every readiness metric we have," the general had said. "Vehicle readiness is at 40%. Communication systems are held together with spare parts from 3 different decades. Supply requisitions take 6 times longer than they should, and we can't figure out why." He'd slid a folder across his desk, thin, classified, marked with the kind of stamps that meant asking questions would end careers. "We think it's either gross incompetence or something more deliberate," the general had continued. "Fraud, maybe. Embezzlement. We need someone on the inside who can see things from the ground level. Someone who won't be recognized." Nora had taken the folder without opening it. "How long do I have?" 2 weeks. Then we need answers." She'd nodded once and walked out. That had been 3 days ago. Lunch came and went. Nora ate a protein bar from her bag and kept working, pulling up requisition logs and cross-referencing them against supply deliveries. The pattern started to emerge after the first hour. Parts ordered but never delivered. Shipments marked as completed when the items never arrived. Requisitions that seemed to vanish entirely after passing through certain approval chains. She made mental notes. didn't write anything down. Not yet. Around 1400 hours, the office door opened and a man walked in wearing the kind of expression that suggested he was used to people jumping when he entered a room. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Thorne was tall, late 40s, with iron gray hair cut high and tight and a jaw carved from granite. His uniform was perfect, every ribbon precisely placed, every crease sharp enough to cut paper. The kind of officer who'd learned early that looking the part was half the battle. He was also the deputy commander of Fort Sentinel. Conversations died as he walked through. Soldiers straightened in their chairs. Even Calloway stood up a little straighter, though Nora noticed the major's hands clenched briefly into fists before she relaxed them. "Major Calloway," Thorne said. His voice was smooth, controlled, the voice of someone who never had to raise it to be heard. "I need the updated vehicle status report by end of business today." "Sir, we're still waiting on data from end of business, Major." It wasn't a request. Calloway's jaw tightened. "Yes, sir." Thorne's eyes swept the room, cataloging faces, making sure everyone knew he'd seen them. His gaze passed over Nora without stopping. Just another clerk. Another nobody. As he turned to leave, Nora noticed a captain lingering near the door. Mid-40s, expensive watch, shoes that looked too nice for an army salary. He spoke quietly with Thorne, both men glancing occasionally at papers that Nora couldn't see from her position. She made a mental note. Officers who whispered were usually hiding something. Thorne walked out, the captain following. The office let out a collective breath. "He's always like that?" someone muttered from across the room. "Only on days that end in Y," Brennan replied. Nora filed that interaction away. The way Thorne had looked at Calloway, the undercurrent of something that wasn't quite hostility, but wasn't far from it. The way nobody had challenged him, even on a request that was clearly impossible to fulfill in the time given. Fear or respect? Sometimes it was hard to tell the difference. The afternoon briefing happened at 1500 hours in a conference room that was too small for the number of people crammed into it. Nora sat in the back with her notebook, one more anonymous face in a sea of exhausted soldiers and contractors. Thorne stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, watching as the logistics chief from each section gave their update. Vehicle maintenance, still behind. Communications, parts delayed. Supply, waiting on approval. Same story, different day. "This is unacceptable," Thorne said when the last briefer finished. His voice was calm, almost conversational, which somehow made it worse. "We've got units rotating through here that depend on our support. When their equipment fails because we didn't do our job, people die. Do you understand that?" Silence. "I don't care about your excuses," he continued. "I don't care that the system is slow. I don't care that you're short-staffed. I care about results, and right now, we're not getting them." He paused, letting that sink in. "Starting next week, we're implementing new tracking procedures. Every requisition will be logged twice, every shipment verified, every delay documented with a written explanation." He glanced around the room. "I want accountability. If something fails, I want to know exactly whose fault it was." Nora watched the faces around her. Nobody looked excited about more paperwork. Nobody looked like they thought this would actually solve anything. They just looked tired. Thorne dismissed the group and they filed out, moving with the slow shuffle of people who'd been beaten down one meeting at a time. Nora was the last to leave. She turned at the door, glanced back. Thorne was still standing there, staring at the wall-mounted map of the base. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides. For just a moment, he looked less like a commander and more like a man standing on the edge of something he couldn't control. Then he noticed her watching, and his expression smoothed into neutral professionalism. "Something I can help you with?" he asked. "No, sir. Just heading back to work." "You're new?" "Yes, sir. Started today." His eyes narrowed slightly. Not suspicious exactly, just calculating. "Blackwell, right?" She was surprised he knew her name. "Yes, sir." "Well, Blackwell, let me give you some advice." He walked closer, stopping just inside the boundaries of what would still be considered professional distance. "This base has a culture problem. People have gotten comfortable with failure. They make excuses instead of finding solutions." He paused. "Don't be one of them." "I won't, sir." He studied her for another moment, then nodded once and walked past her into the hallway. Nora stood there for a long moment after he was gone. That hadn't been a pep talk, that had been a warning, and she filed that away too. The day ended the way it had begun, slowly, painfully, with a dozen small frustrations that added up to nothing accomplished. Nora stayed late, not dramatically late, she wasn't trying to be the hero on day one, but late enough to see what happened when the regular staff went home. Late enough to see which lights stayed on and which offices remained occupied long after the official duty day ended. Calloway's light stayed on until 1900 hours, Brennan's until almost 2000, and one office on the second floor, the one with the nameplate that read LTC Thorn, stayed lit until well past 2100. Nora packed up her things at 2200, nodded to the night shift security guard, and walked out into the Texas night. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since morning. The sky was clear, stars scattered across the darkness like somebody had spilled diamonds on black velvet. She stood there for a moment, breathing in air that tasted like dust and diesel fuel. 12 years in uniform, 4 combat deployments, 16 countries. Too many firefights to count and too many close calls to forget. And somehow, this felt harder than any of it. Because in combat, at least the enemy wore a different uniform. At least you knew who to shoot. Here, the enemy was entropy, bureaucracy, the slow, grinding death of a system that had stopped believing in itself. And somewhere in the middle of all that, there was corruption. She could feel it, the way a surgeon can feel a tumor before the scans confirm it. She just had to find it. By the end of the first week, Nora had settled into the rhythm of the office. Show up at 0730, work through lunch, leave sometime after 1800, be helpful but not exceptional, be competent but not threatening, fade into the background. It was harder than it sounded. Everything in her training screamed to take charge, to fix the problem she saw, to stand up and tell these people exactly how to unfuck the disaster they were drowning in. But that wasn't the mission. The mission was to watch, listen, understand, and slowly, carefully, she began to see the cracks in the foundation. The requisitions that went through Thorne's office seemed to take twice as long as others. Certain supply vendors kept appearing in the logs even though their delivery times were consistently terrible, and there was a pattern to which items went missing. Always high value, always easily resold, always just plausible enough to be written off as bureaucratic error. She didn't have proof yet, just intuition, the kind of gut feeling that came from years of experience reading between the lines. But she was getting closer. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. Nora was working through a stack of misfiled requisitions, trying to match them with delivery confirmations that didn't exist, when Corporal Jace Ridgway walked past her desk and dropped a folder on it. He was maybe 25, with the kind of cocky swagger that suggested he'd never been punched in the mouth hard enough to learn humility. He'd been one of the soldiers at the gate her first day, the one who'd laughed about temp clerks not lasting. "Major Calloway needs these processed by end of day," he said. Didn't ask, stated. Nora looked up. "What are they?" "Supply request for the motor pool. Should be straightforward." She opened the folder and started scanning. Within 30 seconds, she saw the first problem. Within 2 minutes, she'd found 6 more. These weren't errors. These were traps. Someone had intentionally misfiled the requisitions, used outdated form numbers, and referenced supply codes that hadn't been valid since 2019. If she processed them as is, they'd get kicked back. Major Calloway would get blamed for the delay, and the motor pool would stay broken. "These are wrong," Nora said quietly. Ridgway blinked. "What?" "The form numbers are outdated. These need to be redone using AR 710-2 guidelines, current as of last year. The supply codes need to match the Defense Logistics Agency catalog, not the old GSA system, and half of these items are listed under the wrong unit identification codes." The room had gone quiet. Other people were listening now. Ridgway's cocky expression faltered. "How do you know that?" "Because I read the regulations." "You've been here 1 week." Nora met his eyes, didn't blink. "I read fast." Calloway appeared from her office, drawn by the sudden silence. "What's going on?" "The supply requests Corporal Ridgway just gave me have multiple errors," Nora said. "If we submit them as is, they'll be rejected and you'll take the blame." Calloway took the folder, scanned it quickly. Her eyes widened slightly. "She's right," Calloway said. "These are wrong. Who prepared these? Ridgway shifted uncomfortably. I just picked them up from Colonel Thorne's office, ma'am. He said they were ready to go. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Did he? Calloway's voice was flat. Nora kept her expression neutral, but her mind was racing. This wasn't incompetence. This was deliberate. Thorne had set up Calloway to fail, and Nora had just caught it. I'll fix them, Nora said. Give me 2 hours. Calloway studied her for a long moment. You're sure you know what you're doing? Yes, ma'am. All right, do it. She glanced at Ridgway. Dismissed, Corporal. He left quickly, not quite meeting anyone's eyes. Nora opened her laptop and got to work. She stayed until midnight that night, long after everyone else had gone home. The only sound in the office was the hum of the fluorescent lights and the clicking of her keyboard. She didn't just fix the requisitions. She cross-referenced every item against 3 different databases, verified the supply codes, double-checked the unit IDs, made sure every single detail was perfect and unimpeachable, because she knew what would happen if she got it wrong. Thorne would use it as proof that she was incompetent, that Calloway couldn't manage her own people, that the whole logistics section needed to be reorganized under his direct control. This was a test, and she intended to pass. At 0:30, she finally hit submit. Watch the system accept the requisitions without a single error flag. Watch them move into the approval queue where they'd sit for 3 weeks, but at least they'd sit there correctly. She sat back in her chair, rolling her shoulders to work out the knots. That's when she noticed her sleeve had ridden up. There, on her left forearm, was the tattoo. Faded black ink. The distinctive crest of the 75th Ranger Regiment. A scroll wrapped around a sword, backed by a 5-pointed star. She'd gotten it 12 years ago, after her first deployment. Young and stupid and proud. Back when she thought the ink would remind her of who she was. Now it was just one more thing she had to hide. She pulled her sleeve down quickly, glanced around the empty office to make sure nobody had seen. But someone had. Through the window, standing in the parking lot near a street lamp, Staff Sergeant Boone Fletcher was loading equipment into the back of a pickup truck. His eyes were on the 3rd-floor window. On her. And even from that distance, she could see the moment recognition flickered across his face. Not recognition of who she was, not yet, but recognition that she was something more than what her paperwork said. Their eyes met through the glass. Fletcher's expression shifted from curiosity to something harder to read. Then he looked away, finished loading his truck, and drove off into the night. Nora watched him go. The clock was ticking faster now. The second week started with rain. Not the gentle kind that washed away dust and left everything fresh. This was the hard, driving rain that turned the base roads into rivers of red mud and made every task 3 times harder than it needed to be. The kind of weather that felt like an omen. Nora arrived at 0700 30 minutes earlier than required and found the logistics office already buzzing with crisis energy. Phones ringing, voices overlapping, the particular brand of controlled panic that came from too many problems arriving at once. Major Calloway stood in the center of it, hair already escaping from its bun, one hand pressed to her ear as she tried to hear whoever was shouting through her phone. I understand that, sir, she was saying, voice tight with forced patience. But we can't expedite parts that haven't shipped yet. The vendor says they're waiting on... Yes, sir, I understand it's unacceptable. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just explaining why... She pulled the phone away from her ear as whoever was on the other end started yelling loud enough for half the office to hear. Brennan caught Nora's eye from across the room and gave her a look that said, "Welcome to Monday." Nora set her bag down and logged into her computer. The screen flickered to life, showing her inbox. 47 new emails since she'd left last night. Most of them flagged urgent. Most of them would turn out to be anything but. She started sorting through them, fingers moving automatically while her brain worked on other problems. The requisition she'd fixed last Thursday had gone through without issue. No errors, no kickbacks, just smooth sailing through the approval chain. Calloway had noticed. Hadn't said much, but there'd been a moment of eye contact that morning that said thank you louder than words. Thorne had noticed too. Nora had seen him watching her through the conference room window during Friday's briefing. Not obviously, just quick glances that lasted a fraction too long. The kind of attention that meant she was on his radar now. That was dangerous. but also necessary. She couldn't catch him if he wasn't looking. The morning dragged on. More emails, more requisitions, more forms that needed to be filled out so other forms could be filled out. The rain hammered against the windows like it was trying to get inside. Around 1000 hours, Calloway's office door opened, and she emerged looking like she'd aged 5 years in 3 hours. "Brennan, Fletcher's on his way up," she called out. "Apparently the generator situation has gone from bad to catastrophic." "Define catastrophic," Brennan replied without looking up from his screen. "2 generators down, 1 barely functioning, and the backup power grid for the communications hub is running on thoughts and prayers." "So Tuesday, basically." Calloway didn't laugh. "This isn't funny, Sergeant. If we lose power to the comm hub during the storm, we're deaf. Every unit on this base depends on those systems, and if something goes wrong while we can't communicate—" She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Nora kept her eyes on her screen, but her attention was completely focused on the conversation. This was exactly the kind of critical failure point she'd been looking for. The places where the system was stretched so thin that one wrong move would break everything. The door banged open and Staff Sergeant Boone Fletcher walked in, trailing mud and frustration. He was early 40s, built like someone who'd spent his life doing manual labor, with grease under his fingernails and the permanent squint of a man who'd stared at broken engines in too many deserts. He was also the man who'd seen her in the window 5 nights ago, the one who'd looked at her like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Ma'am," Fletcher said, nodding to Calloway, "we need to talk about the generators." "I figured. How bad?" "Generator 3 is completely dead. Bearing failure in the main shaft. Generator 1 is running, but it's making a noise like a dying cat. And Generator 2 is the only one that's actually functional, but it's running at 90% capacity, and I don't trust it to handle the full load if the others go down." Calloway rubbed her temples. "What do you need?" "Parts that are on back order. Technicians who don't exist. And about 6 months that we don't have." "Fletcher, ma'am, I'm not being difficult. I'm being realistic. I've submitted requisitions for these parts 3 times. They keep getting lost in the system. Last time I called the vendor, they told me they never received any order from Fort Sentinel." Calloway's jaw tightened. "That's impossible. I saw those requisitions go through myself." "I'm just telling you what they told me." Nora's fingers had stopped moving on her keyboard. Her mind was racing through possibilities. Requisitions submitted but never received, parts ordered but never delivered, a pattern of failure that was too consistent to be random. Someone was intercepting those orders, someone who had access to the system and knew how to make things disappear. She pulled up the logistics database and started searching. Generator parts, Fort Sentinel, last 6 months. The results made her blood run cold. 17 requisitions for generator components, all submitted through proper channels, all approved at the unit level, all sent to the Defense Logistics Agency for processing, and then nothing. They'd vanished into the digital void like they'd never existed, except they had existed. Someone had made sure they existed long enough to create a paper trail, and then someone else had made sure they never actually resulted in delivered parts. "Ma'am," Nora said quietly, too quietly for anyone but Calloway to hear. Calloway turned. "What is it, Blackwell?" "I need to show you something." Calloway walked over to Nora's desk, followed by Fletcher and Brennan. Nora pulled up the search results and pointed to the screen. 17 requisitions, she said. All properly formatted, all approved. But if you cross-reference them with actual delivery confirmations, she pulled up another window. There's nothing. No deliveries, no shipments, not even rejection notices. Fletcher leaned in closer, eyes narrowing. "How is that possible?" "It's not," Nora said, "unless someone's deleting them after they're submitted." The room had gone very quiet. "That's a serious accusation," Calloway said carefully. "It's not an accusation, ma'am. It's an observation. The data doesn't lie." Nora pulled up another screen. "And it's not just generators. Look at this." She showed them communications equipment requisitions, vehicle parts, high-value items that all followed the same pattern. Submitted, approved, vanished. Brennan let out a low whistle. "Someone's stealing from us." "Or covering up the fact that they're stealing from someone else," Fletcher added. "If the parts never officially arrive, there's no record of them existing, which means they can be diverted and sold without anyone noticing." Calloway's face had gone pale. "This goes beyond my pay grade. I need to brief Colonel Thorne." Nora felt ice run down her spine. "Ma'am, with respect, I'm not sure that's the best idea." "Why not?" "Because someone with high-level access is doing this. Someone who knows the system well enough to manipulate it without leaving obvious traces. If we alert the wrong person—" "You think it's Thorne," Calloway said flatly. "I think we need to be careful about who we trust with this information." Fletcher was watching Nora with an expression that had shifted from puzzled to something sharper, more alert. "You've been here a week," he said slowly. "How do you know this much about military logistics systems?" Nora met his eyes. "I read the manuals." "Nobody reads manuals that carefully." "I do." The staring contest lasted 3 seconds. Then Fletcher shook his head and turned back to Calloway. "Ma'am, she's right. We need to be careful. If someone's running a theft ring, they're not going to go quietly." Calloway looked between them, clearly wrestling with the decision. Finally, she nodded. "All right. We document everything, we keep it quiet, and we figure out who's behind this before we go to higher authority." She looked at Nora. "You're good with databases?" "Good enough." "Then dig deeper. I want to know every requisition that's disappeared in the last year. I want patterns. I want proof." "Yes, ma'am." Calloway turned to leave, then paused. "Blackwell? Thank you for caring enough to notice." Nora just nodded. After they'd dispersed, she sat at her desk staring at her screen, mind working through the implications. She'd found the corruption. Now she needed to prove it. And she needed to do it without revealing who she really was. The rain continued to hammer against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like artillery fire. The storm was just beginning. 3 days later, Nora was ankle-deep in evidence and running out of time. She'd spent every evening working late, pulling records and cross-referencing shipments. The pattern was clear now. Over the past 18 months, Fort Sentinel had submitted requisitions for approximately $4.2 million worth of equipment and parts. Only $1.7 million had actually been delivered. The missing $2.5 million had been routed through a supply company called Sentinel Logistics Solutions, a name that was just generic enough to blend in with the hundreds of other contractors in the defense supply chain. Nora had done some digging. Sentinel Logistics Solutions was a shell company registered in Delaware with exactly 3 employees on paper and an address that turned out to be a UPS store in Austin. It was a fraud, a sophisticated one, but fraud nonetheless, and she was 90% certain that Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Thorne was behind it. The evidence was circumstantial, but compelling. Every vanishing requisition had passed through Thorne's office for final approval. The timing of the thefts had started 6 months after Thorne arrived at Fort Sentinel. And the bank accounts for Sentinel Logistics Solutions traced back to an offshore entity that had connections, tenuous but real, to Thorne's brother-in-law. She didn't have enough to make it stick in court, not yet, but she had enough to start asking uncomfortable questions. The problem was that asking those questions would burn her cover completely. She was still debating her next move when her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. "Parking lot B, now, come alone." She stared at the message for 3 seconds, mind racing through possibilities. Trap? Warning? Someone who knew something? Only one way to find out. She grabbed her jacket and headed out. Parking lot B was on the far side of the base, near the old maintenance sheds that hadn't been used in years. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still soft, her boots sinking slightly with each step. A figure stood near a rusted pickup truck, partially hidden in shadow. Nora approached carefully, hands visible, senses on high alert. The figure stepped into the light. It was an old man, late 60s, maybe early 70s. He wore jeans and a faded army jacket with patches that identified him as retired military. His face was weathered like old leather, his eyes sharp and clear despite his age. "Ms. Blackwell," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel sliding down a metal chute. "Do I know you?" "No, but I know you." He pulled something from his jacket. For a half second, Nora's hand moved toward her concealed sidearm. Then she saw it was just a photograph. He held it up. It showed a young woman in Army combat uniform standing next to an MRAP in Afghanistan, captain's bars on her collar, rifle in her hands, eyes scanning the horizon like she could see threats before they materialized. It was Nora, 7 years ago. "Where did you get that?" she asked quietly. "I'm retired Command Sergeant Major Warren Grayson," he said. "Served 32 years. Did 3 tours in the Gulf. Saw your picture in an old Army Times article about female combat leaders. You were famous for about 15 minutes back in 2019. That was a long time ago. Not that long. And you don't forget a face like that. Especially when that face shows up at your old base pretending to be a civilian clerk." He lowered the photograph. "So here's my question, Colonel Blackwell. What the hell are you really doing here?" Nora's mind raced. Deny? Attack? Try to bluff her way out? No, Grayson was too smart for that, and more importantly, he was retired military, which meant he understood operational security, understood need to know, and he'd approached her privately. That meant he wasn't trying to expose her. He wanted answers. "Off the record?" she asked. "Way off. I'm investigating systemic failures in the logistics system. Pentagon sent me to figure out why Fort Sentinel can't keep its equipment operational." Grayson nodded slowly. "And you found something." "I found a lot of things, including the fact that someone's stealing millions of dollars worth of equipment." Nora's eyes sharpened. "What do you know about that?" "I know I'm not blind and I'm not stupid. I still have friends on this base. They tell me things. About requisitions that disappear, about parts that never arrive, about a supply officer named LaRue who drives a BMW on a captain's salary. Captain Vincent LaRue. That's the one. He's connected to Thorne. Everyone knows it. Nobody says it out loud because Thorne has enough pull to make life miserable for anyone who crosses him." "Do you have proof?" "If I had proof, I'd have gone to CID myself. I just have what any old soldier has. Pattern recognition and a nose for bullshit." He studied her face. "But you've got more than that, don't you?" Nora didn't answer directly. "What do you want from me, Sergeant Major?" "I want you to nail these bastards," Grayson said flatly. "I spent 32 years serving this army. I bled for it, lost friends for it, and watching some careerist piece of shit steal from it makes me sick. So whatever you're doing, whatever you need, I'm here to help. This isn't your fight anymore. The hell it isn't. Once you put on the uniform, it's always your fight." They stood in silence for a moment. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and oil from the maintenance sheds. Finally, Nora nodded. "All right. But you need to keep your mouth shut. Nobody can know who I am or what I'm doing here. Not your friends, not your family, nobody." "Understood." "And if this goes sideways, you were never here." "Colonel, I've been covering my ass since before you were born. I know how this works." He handed her a business card with a handwritten phone number. "You need anything, you call me, day or night." She took the card. "Thank you, Sergeant Major." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when Thorne's in handcuffs." He turned and walked back to his truck, moving with the careful gait of a man whose knees had taken too much abuse over too many years. The truck's engine coughed to life and he drove away, taillights disappearing into the gray afternoon. Nora stood there for a long moment, turning the business card over in her fingers. She'd just gained an ally, and possibly exposed herself in the process. The clock was ticking faster now. The storm hit Fort Sentinel 2 days later, with the kind of fury that made you believe in Old Testament God. The Weather Service had been tracking it for a week. A massive low-pressure system pulling moisture up from the Gulf of Mexico and slamming it into the Texas plains. They'd predicted heavy rain, high winds, possible flooding. They'd been optimistic. By 1400 hours, the sky had turned the color of old bruises. Wind was gusting hard enough to rip branches off trees and send trash cans tumbling across parking lots like tumbleweeds. Rain came down in sheets so thick you couldn't see 20 feet in front of your face. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, a critical supply convoy was trying to reach Fort Sentinel. Nora first heard about it when Calloway came running out of her office, phone pressed to her ear, and panic written across her face. "Say again?" Calloway shouted into the phone. "You're breaking up. Yes, I understand they're trying. What's their current position?" She listened for a moment, face growing paler. "They're where?" "That road floods every time it rains hard. Why didn't they—" "No, I understand. Just get them here safely." She hung up and looked at Brennan. "We've got a problem." "Just one?" Brennan asked. "That'd be a good day." "The convoy from Houston is stuck on Highway 77. They're carrying critical communications equipment, the replacement parts we've been waiting on for 6 months, but they're having trouble navigating in the storm, and they've lost radio contact with the base." "Lost contact? How?" "The weather's interfering with normal frequencies. They can hear us, but we can barely hear them. And the GPS routing is glitching because of the atmospheric conditions." Nora's attention had locked onto the conversation. She pulled up the convoy tracking system on her computer, fingers moving fast. The screen showed a cluster of icons representing vehicles that should have been 30 miles away, but appeared to be stationary. Not good. "Where exactly are they stuck?" she asked. Calloway came over to look at the screen. "Last known position was mile marker 237 on Highway 77. That's the low section near Cypress Creek," Nora finished. "If they're there during this storm, they're in danger of flooding. We need to get them moving now." "We're trying, but without clear communications," the lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. Everyone in the office looked up at the ceiling like they could see through it to the electrical systems beyond. "That's not good," Brennan said quietly. The lights flickered again. This time they dimmed to about half strength before recovering. "Brennan," Calloway said, voice tight, "tell me the generators are holding." "I'll check." He grabbed his radio and keyed the mic. "Motor pool, this is Brennan. Give me status on primary generator." Static. Then Fletcher's voice came through, distorted but audible. "Generator 2 is struggling. Load's too high. Generator 1 is still making that noise I told you about. If we lose Generator 2, we're running on backup power only, and backup wasn't designed to handle the full base load." "How long can backup hold?" "In this storm? Maybe an hour, maybe less." Calloway swore quietly. "All right, all non-essential systems go offline now. Computers, lights, anything that's not critical. We need to reduce the load." People started shutting down workstations. The office lights dimmed as someone flipped breakers. Within 2 minutes, the room had transformed from a modern workspace into something that looked like a bunker preparing for siege. And then the communications hub alarms started going off. The sound was shrill and electronic, cutting through the rain noise like a knife. Red lights began flashing in the hallway. Brennan's radio crackled. "All stations, this is Communications Hub. We've lost primary antenna array. Lightning strike on the relay tower. Backup array is online, but we're operating at reduced capacity. Repeat, reduced capacity." "Reduced by how much?" Brennan demanded. 60%, maybe 70. We can't maintain all channels simultaneously." Nora watched the convoy tracker. The icons were still stationary, and now a new problem was appearing on the screen, a weather alert showing flash flood warnings for the exact area where the convoy was stuck. They were running out of time. "Ma'am," Nora said quietly, too quietly for anyone but Calloway to hear over the chaos, "we need to switch the convoy to emergency frequency." Calloway turned. "What?" "Emergency frequency 243.0. It's military universal. Every convoy vehicle is equipped with radios that can access it. But more importantly, it runs on a different antenna array than our normal communications, one that isn't affected by the storm damage." "How do you know that?" "Because—" Nora stopped herself. "Because I've done this before. Because I've guided convoys through worse. Because I know these systems better than anyone in this building." She couldn't say that. "Because I read the communications protocols," she said instead. R25 to 50. The backup emergency system uses ground wave propagation instead of line of sight, more reliable in severe weather." Brennan had come over now, listening. "She's right. We don't use 243.0 for routine stuff because it's reserved for actual emergencies. But if we need to reach that convoy..." The lights flickered again. Longer this time. Long enough that the emergency lights kicked on, bathing everything in sickly red. "Do it," Calloway said. "Switch to emergency frequency." "Ma'am, that's above my authority. Then I'll take responsibility. Do it now." Brennan nodded and grabbed his radio. Communications Hub, this is Brennan. Authorization from Major Calloway to activate emergency frequency 243.0 for convoy guidance. Confirm. Silence. Just static and the sound of rain hammering the building. Then, confirmed. Switching to 243.0. Stand by. Nora was already moving toward the communications hub. She didn't ask permission, didn't wait for orders. Her stride carried the unmistakable authority of command, the kind soldiers recognized instinctively even when rank wasn't visible. Calloway and Brennan followed. The communications hub was in the basement of Building 6, a windowless room that smelled like ozone and hot electronics. Screens lined the walls showing frequency waterfalls and signal strengths. Two soldiers sat at consoles wearing headsets, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of monitors. One of them looked up as Nora entered. "Who are you?" "She's with me," Calloway said. "What's the status?" "We've switched to 243.0, but we're not getting a response from the convoy yet. The storm's creating too much interference. Even the backup system is struggling." Nora stepped up to the console. "Let me try." The soldier started to protest, but Calloway cut him off with a gesture. "Move aside." He did. Nora sat down, pulled on the headset, and studied the controls for exactly 3 seconds. Then her hands moved across the interface with practiced efficiency, muscle memory taking over. She adjusted the gain, narrowed the bandwidth, switched to a specific subchannel within the emergency frequency that would have less interference. "Fort Sentinel to Convoy Alpha," she said into the microphone. Her voice had changed. Lower, more controlled. The voice of someone who'd spent years giving orders in crisis situations. "Fort Sentinel to Convoy Alpha. Do you read?" Static. She adjusted the gain again. "Convoy Alpha, this is Fort Sentinel on emergency frequency 243.0. If you can hear this transmission, key your mic twice." More static. Then, 2 distinct clicks. "Convoy Alpha, Fort Sentinel reads you. Understand you are experiencing navigation difficulty in severe weather. Confirm your current position." The voice that came back was distorted but audible. "Fort Sentinel, Convoy Alpha. Current position approximately mile marker 235, Highway 77. Road conditions deteriorating. Water rising. Request guidance." Nora pulled up the digital map on the console screen. Her eyes traced the route, calculating distances and alternatives with the speed of someone who'd done convoy planning in her sleep. "Convoy Alpha, be advised your current position is in a flood zone. You need to move immediately. Turn around and head north on 77 for 2 miles. Take County Road 1845 east. It's higher ground. Follow that for 6 miles until you intersect with Highway 190. From there, you can approach the base from the north. Do you copy?" "Copy, Fort Sentinel. Turn north on 77, east on County Road 1845. Approach from the north on 190. Confirm that route is passable?" Nora glanced at Brennan. He was already pulling up road condition reports on another console. "Mostly clear," he said. "Some flooding on 190, but not impassable. It's their best option." "Convoy Alpha, route is confirmed passable. Move immediately. Weather conditions will continue to deteriorate. We will maintain radio contact on this frequency. Fort Sentinel, out." She sat back, hands still on the controls, eyes fixed on the screen showing the convoy's position. Slowly, the icons started moving. North, then east, following the route exactly as she'd laid it out. The room was dead silent except for the hum of equipment and the muffled roar of the storm outside. Calloway was staring at Nora like she was seeing her for the first time. Brennan's expression had shifted from puzzled to something closer to certainty. He knew. Maybe not all of it, but enough. "Who are you?" Calloway asked quietly. Nora didn't take her eyes off the screen. "Someone who's seen worse, ma'am." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give right now." They stood in tense silence for the next 40 minutes, tracking the convoy's progress. Nora maintained radio contact, giving updates and adjustments as road conditions changed. Her voice never wavered, never hesitated. She spoke with the absolute confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and expected to be obeyed. At 1700 hours, the convoy reached Fort Sentinel's north gate. All vehicles accounted for, all equipment intact, 0 casualties. The soldier at the console let out a breath he'd been holding. They made it. Yeah, Brennan said softly, still watching Nora. They did. Nora pulled off the headset and stood up. Her legs were stiff from sitting. Her head was pounding from the concentration and the stress of maintaining the performance. Because that's what it had been. A performance. Playing the role of someone competent but not exceptional. Someone who'd read the manuals and gotten lucky. But the truth was written all over Calloway's face, and Brennan's, and even the young soldier at the console. They knew she was something more. They just didn't know what yet. Good work, Blackwell, Calloway said. There was a question in her voice, a demand for explanation that she was too professional to voice in front of subordinates. Thank you, ma'am. We should debrief. My office, 20 minutes. It wasn't a request. Yes, ma'am. Nora walked out of the communications hub and back up the stairs to the logistics office. The storm was still raging outside. The lights were still flickering. But inside her head, everything was crystal clear. She'd saved the convoy. She'd proven her competence. And she'd stepped out of the shadows just enough that people were starting to ask questions, which meant her time was running out. She had maybe 48 hours before someone connected the dots. Before someone ran her name through the right database. Before her cover collapsed completely. She needed to move fast. The debrief in Calloway's office lasted exactly 37 minutes. Brennan was there. Fletcher had been called up from the motor pool, all of them watching Nora with expressions that ranged from suspicious to openly curious. Where did you learn to do that? Calloway asked. No preamble, no small talk. I have some military experience, Nora said carefully. Some experience? You guided that convoy like you've been doing it your whole life. You knew frequencies and protocols that most logistics officers don't even understand. And you did it without hesitating, without checking a manual, without asking for help. I'm good under pressure. That's not an answer. Fletcher spoke up. I've been in the Army for 22 years. I've worked with supply officers, logistics planners, transportation coordinators. You don't move like any of them. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You move like someone who's used to being in charge. The room was very quiet. Nora met Fletcher's eyes, saw the understanding there, saw that he'd already figured it out, or close enough. I can't tell you everything, she said finally. Not yet, but I need you to trust me when I say I'm here to help. The problems on this base, the missing equipment, the failed requisitions, the corruption, I'm going to fix it, but I need time. How much time? Calloway asked. A week, maybe less. And then what? And then you'll know everything, I promise. Brennan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. You're investigating Thorm, aren't you? Nora didn't answer, didn't need to. I knew it, Brennan said. That son of a bitch has been dirty from day one. I just couldn't prove it. Can you prove it now? Fletcher asked Nora directly. Almost. I need a few more pieces. And I need you to keep quiet about what happened today. If we keep quiet, Thorne's going to notice anyway, Calloway said. That convoy was carrying equipment his office has been blocking for months. The fact that it arrived is going to raise questions. Let it raise questions. Let him wonder. Scared people make mistakes. They looked at each other, some unspoken conversation passing between them. Finally, Calloway nodded. 1 week, she said. But if you're playing us, if this turns out to be some kind of Inspector General witch hunt, it's not. I'm on your side. I've always been on your side. Fletcher stood up. All right, mystery woman, you've got your week. But after that, I want answers. You'll get them. They filed out, leaving Nora alone in Calloway's office. She sat there in the dim light, listening to the storm rage outside, and knew she'd just crossed the line she couldn't uncross. Her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. We need to talk. Thorne knows something. Grayson. Nora stared at the message. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one that was coming. The call came at 0300 hours, 2 days after the storm. Nora was awake when her phone buzzed. She'd been awake for hours, sitting in the darkened living room of her off-base apartment, laptop open, going through files she'd copied from the Fort Sentinel logistics database. Bank records, shipping manifests, email chains that someone had tried to delete but hadn't scrubbed thoroughly enough. She had everything now. Every transaction, every falsified delivery, every dollar that had been siphoned off through the shell company. 2.5 million over 18 months. Not enough to trigger automatic audits, but enough to make Thorne and LaRue very comfortable. The evidence was airtight. She could take it to the Criminal Investigation Command tomorrow and watch the dominoes fall. But the phone call changed everything. Blackwell, she answered without checking the caller ID. It's Grayson. The old sergeant major's voice was tight with urgency. We've got a problem. Thorne knows. Nora was on her feet instantly, already moving toward her closet where her go bag was packed. Knows what? That you're not who you say you are. He called in a favor with someone at INSCOM, got access to restricted personnel databases, found your real file. How do you know this? Because he told LaRue, and LaRue got drunk at the O Club tonight and started running his mouth. One of my friends overheard. Nora's mind raced through implications and contingencies. If Thorne knew she was a colonel, knew she was investigating him, then he'd panic. Panicked men did stupid things. Dangerous things. What's his move? She asked. He's going to expose you at tomorrow's ceremony. Nora froze. What ceremony? You didn't hear? The new brigade commander is taking over tomorrow morning. Full parade ground ceremony. Entire base will be there. Thorne's planning to get up in front of everyone and accuse you of impersonating a federal employee. Make it look like you're the criminal, not him. That's insane. He'd be exposing his own operation. He doesn't care. He thinks if he discredits you publicly, makes you look like some kind of spy or saboteur, nobody will believe anything you say about him. He'll take his chances with whatever evidence you have, as long as he destroys your credibility first. Nora sat down on the edge of her couch, thinking hard. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to gather evidence, brief the CID, let them make the arrests quietly and professionally, clean, surgical. Instead, Thorne was about to turn it into a circus, unless she moved first. What time's the ceremony? She asked. 0800, full dress uniform for military personnel. You're expected to be there as support staff. I'll be there. Colonel, if he calls you out in front of the entire base, then I'll deal with it. Thank you for the warning, Sergeant Major. She hung up and sat in the darkness, laptop screen casting blue light across her face. Tomorrow morning, one way or another, this was going to end. She just had to make sure it ended the right way. The parade ground at Fort Sentinel was built to hold 3,000 people. By 0730 the next morning, it was nearly full. Soldiers in dress uniforms stood in perfect formation, boots gleaming in the early sunlight that had finally broken through after days of storms. Officers clustered near the reviewing stand, making small talk and checking watches. Civilians like Nora gathered near the back, far from the action but close enough to witness whatever was about to happen. The sky was clear, the temperature already climbing toward uncomfortable. The kind of morning that made you sweat just standing still. Nora wore dark slacks, a white blouse, and a blazer she'd never worn before. Professional. Unremarkable. The kind of outfit that said civilian support staff without saying much else. But in the inside pocket of that blazer was a USB drive containing every piece of evidence she'd gathered. And in her purse was her military ID card. The real one, with her actual rank and photograph. Just in case. She positioned herself near the edge of the civilian section, close enough to the front that she could move quickly if needed. Her eyes scanned the crowd, cataloging faces and positions. Major Calloway stood with the logistics battalion staff. Brennan and Fletcher were in the enlisted formation. Grayson was in the audience section reserved for retirees, wearing his old dress uniform with medals from 3 decades of service. And Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Thorne stood near the podium with the other senior officers, jaw tight, eyes scanning the crowd like a predator looking for prey. His gaze found Nora, locked on. For 3 full seconds, they stared at each other across 50 yards of parade ground. Then Thorne smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. The ceremony began at exactly 0800 with a color guard presenting the flags and the national anthem echoing across the field. Everyone stood at attention, hands over hearts or raised in salute. Nora stood perfectly still, but her mind was calculating distances and angles. The podium was 40 feet away. The nearest exit was 60 feet behind her. The CID office was in Building 12, approximately 200 yards to the east. She had options. She just needed to know which one to use. The outgoing brigade commander gave his farewell speech. It was professional and boring, full of the standard phrases about honor and service that sounded meaningful until you'd heard them 1,000 times. People shifted their weight and tried not to look at their watches. Then came the introduction of the incoming commander. And now, the master of ceremonies announced, "It is my honor to introduce our new brigade commander, who will be arriving shortly. But first, Lieutenant Colonel Thorne has asked to address the formation." Nora's pulse kicked up. This was it. Thorne walked to the podium with the confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. He adjusted the microphone, looked out over the assembled base, and let the moment stretch just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. "Good morning," he said. His voice carried clearly across the parade ground. "I know this is unusual. Normally we don't interrupt a change of command ceremony, but I have a matter of critical importance that needs to be addressed immediately." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Soldiers glanced at each other. Officers leaned in closer. "For the past 2 weeks," Thorne continued, "we have had someone on this base operating under false pretenses. Someone who claimed to be a civilian logistics clerk, but who has been conducting unauthorized surveillance and accessing classified information systems." The murmurs grew louder. Nora saw Calloway's head snap toward her, eyes wide. "This person has violated federal law," Thorne said, his voice rising, "has compromised operational security, and has been gathering information about base operations for purposes I can only assume are hostile." He turned and pointed directly at Nora. "Ms. Blackwell, or whoever you really are, I'm calling you out, right here, right now. Tell these people who you actually are and what you're really doing on this base." Every head turned. 3,000 pairs of eyes locked onto Nora standing at the edge of the civilian section. The silence was absolute. Nora stood perfectly still, her face expressionless. Her mind was running through scenarios at light speed. She could deny it, play innocent, force Thorne to prove his accusation without any support. But that wouldn't solve anything. It would just delay the inevitable. Or she could end this, right now, on her terms. She made her decision in less than a second. Nora reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her military ID card. Held it up so the morning sun caught the laminate and made it shine. "My name is Colonel Nora Blackwell," she said. Her voice carried across the parade ground with the same command presence she'd used in the communications hub. "United States Army, service number 589324471. I was sent here by the Pentagon to investigate systemic failures in logistics operations and equipment readiness." The silence shattered into a wave of shocked voices. Soldiers broke formation, disciplined to turn and stare. Officers started talking over each other. The master of ceremonies looked like someone had just told him the sky was falling. Triumph drained from Thorne's expression, replaced by confusion that flickered across his features like static. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to deny it, to make excuses, to look guilty. Instead, she'd just owned it completely. "You see?" Thorne said, recovering quickly. "She admits it. She's been operating under false identity. Under authorized cover," Nora cut him off. Her voice was steel. "Approved by the Inspector General's office and the Secretary of the Army. Everything I've done has been legal and within the scope of my orders." She started walking toward the podium. Not fast, not aggressive, just steady and purposeful. The crowd parted like water around a ship's prow. "During my 2 weeks here," she continued, "I discovered evidence of systematic theft and fraud. Someone on this base has been stealing equipment and parts worth approximately $2.5 million. They've been doing it through a shell company called Sentinel Logistics Solutions, and they've been covering their tracks by manipulating requisition records in the logistics database." She'd reached the steps to the reviewing stand. Thorne moved to block her, but a full colonel in the officer section called out, "Let her speak!" Thorne stepped aside, jaw clenched so tight the muscles stood out like cables. Nora climbed the steps and stood at the podium. She pulled the USB drive from her pocket and held it up. "Everything is on here," she said. "Every transaction, every falsified record. Every dollar that was stolen from the American taxpayer and from the soldiers who needed that equipment to do their jobs." She turned to look directly at Thorne. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Thorne and Captain Vincent LaRue are responsible. I have bank records linking them to the shell company. I have emails showing they coordinated the thefts. I have shipping manifests proving they diverted equipment to be sold on the black market. The color leached from Thorne's skin, leaving him looking like a man who just felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. That's a lie. She's making this up to cover her own illegal activity. Then let's call the Criminal Investigation Command right now, Nora said calmly. Let's have them examine this evidence. Let's put everything on the table and see who's telling the truth. She pulled out her phone, dialed the number she'd memorized 3 days ago. CID duty officer? This is Colonel Nora Blackwell. I'm at Fort Sentinel and I need agents here immediately. I have evidence of criminal activity by senior officers. Yes, I'll hold. The parade ground was in chaos now. Officers shouting questions, soldiers abandoning formation. The master of ceremonies had completely lost control of the situation. Thorne made a move toward the steps, like he was going to run. But Fletcher was already there, blocking his path. So was Brennan. And behind them, Grayson had appeared from the crowd, standing with his arms crossed and a look on his face that said, "Try it." Thorne stopped, looked around at the circle of soldiers closing in, looked at Nora standing at the podium with her phone to her ear and that USB drive in her hand. And finally, the reality of what was happening broke through his denial. "You don't understand," he said, voice cracking slightly. "I was going to pay it back. It was just temporary. I had some financial problems and I was going to—" "You were going to steal from soldiers and hope nobody noticed," Nora said flatly. "That's all you were going to do." 3 military police vehicles came roaring across the parade ground, lights flashing. CID agents in civilian clothes piled out, badges already visible on their belts. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s with the bearing of someone who'd seen everything twice, walked directly to Nora. "Colonel Blackwell?" "That's me." "Special Agent Morrison, CID. We got your call. You have evidence?" Nora handed her the USB drive. "Everything you need. Bank records, emails, shipping manifests. 2 suspects. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Thorne and Captain Vincent LaRue." Morrison looked at Thorne, then back at Nora. "You've been undercover?" "For 2 weeks. Full authorization from the IG's office. I can provide documentation." "We'll need that, but first," Morrison turned to her team, "take them both into custody." 2 agents moved toward Thorne. He didn't resist, didn't run. He just stood there as they put handcuffs on him, his face blank with shock. Another team was already heading toward the officers' section where LaRue had been sitting. Nora saw him try to slip away through the crowd, saw Fletcher move to intercept, saw LaRue go down face first in the grass as Fletcher tackled him with the efficiency of someone who'd done it before. The CID agents pulled LaRue to his feet and cuffed him. It was over in less than 3 minutes. Morrison turned back to Nora. "Colonel, we're going to need a full debrief. Everything you found, everyone you talked to, complete chain of custody for all evidence." "Understood. I can be at your office in 30 minutes. Make it 20. Morrison walked away, barking orders into her radio. The CID vehicles pulled out with Thorne and LaRue in the back, taking them to wherever people went when their careers and lives fell apart simultaneously. Nora stood at the podium, looking out over 3,000 stunned faces. The base had just watched their deputy commander get arrested for theft and fraud, had watched a civilian clerk reveal herself as a colonel, had seen everything they thought they knew about their chain of command explode in real time. Someone needed to say something, to acknowledge what had just happened, to give them some kind of direction. Nora took a breath and stepped back to the microphone. "I know you have questions," she said. "I know this looks bad, but here's what you need to understand. The system failed you. Your leadership failed you. People who were supposed to take care of you were stealing from you instead." She paused. "But that stops today. The equipment you need will start arriving. The requisitions that were blocked will go through. The corruption that's been rotting this base from the inside is finished." She looked across the formation, saw Calloway standing with tears in her eyes, Saw Brennan and Fletcher standing a little straighter. Saw Grayson give her a single sharp nod of approval. You deserved better, Nora said quietly. And starting now, better is what you're going to get. She stepped away from the podium. The master of ceremonies, who'd been standing frozen for the last 10 minutes, finally found his voice. Formation dismissed. 3,000 soldiers broke ranks and immediately started talking, the sound rising like a wave across the parade ground. Nora walked down the steps and headed toward the CID building. She made it about 20 feet before Calloway caught up to her. Colonel, Calloway said. The word came out strange, like she was still processing it. Nora stopped. Major? You could have told me. Could have told any of us who you were. I couldn't. Not until I had the evidence I needed. If Thorne had known what I was really doing here, he would have destroyed everything and run. Calloway nodded slowly. I understand. I wish I'd known I wasn't crazy. That the system really was broken, and it wasn't just me failing to figure it out. You weren't failing. You were fighting a rigged game. And you were winning anyway. Nora met her eyes. You kept this section running when it should have collapsed. You protected your people. You never gave up. That's not failure. That's the definition of leadership. Calloway's composure cracked, just for a second. Just long enough for Nora to see the exhaustion and relief and gratitude all mixed together. Thank you, Calloway said quietly. Don't thank me yet. We've still got 6 months of work to unfuck everything Thorne broke. I'm not going anywhere until this base is fixed. That's the other half of my orders. Nora smiled slightly. Hope you don't mind having a colonel looking over your shoulder for a while. After what I just saw, ma'am, you can look over my shoulder anytime you want. They walked together toward the CID building, leaving the chaos of the parade ground behind them. The debrief took 6 hours. Nora sat in a windowless conference room at the CID office and walked Special Agent Morrison through every detail. The fake background, the cover story, the 2 weeks of investigation. Every piece of evidence and how she'd obtained it. Every conversation and who'd witnessed it. Morrison recorded everything, asked pointed questions, and occasionally made notes on a legal pad with handwriting that looked like a seismograph during an earthquake. This is solid work, Morrison said when they finally finished. Textbook undercover operation. The prosecution's gonna love you. I just want to make sure it sticks, Nora said. These guys don't get to plea down to some minor charge and walk away. With what you've given us, they're looking at federal charges, theft of government property, fraud, conspiracy. We're talking 10 to 15 years minimum. Morrison leaned back in her chair. They're done. Good. Although, I have to say, Colonel, you took a hell of a risk. If Thorne had figured out who you were a week earlier, he would have run and we'd have caught him anyway. I had contingencies. Still, going undercover as a civilian on your own base, that takes either guts or crazy. Morrison smiled slightly. Maybe both. Maybe, Nora agreed. Morrison closed her notebook. We'll need you available for the court-martial proceedings. Could be months before it goes to trial. I'll be here. Like I said, I'm not leaving until this base is fixed. Then I guess we'll be seeing a lot of each other. Morrison stood and offered her hand. Welcome to Fort Sentinel, Colonel. Officially this time. Nora shook it. Thank you, Agent Morrison. She walked out into the late afternoon sunlight. The temperature had dropped slightly, but the air still felt thick and heavy. Storm weather building again on the horizon. Her phone buzzed. Text from Grayson. Well done, Colonel. Buying you a beer tonight. No is not an option. She smiled and typed back. 1,900 hours. You're paying. Damn right I am. Nora pocketed her phone and headed back toward the logistics building. She had work to do. Requisitions to unfuck, systems to rebuild, trust to restore. But first, she had one more stop to make. The motor pool was quiet at 1,700 hours. Most of the mechanics had gone home. A few diehards remained, working on vehicles that couldn't wait until morning. Fletcher was one of them. He stood in front of Generator 2 with a wrench in one hand and a look of intense concentration on his face. The generator was running smoothly now, the grinding noise that had plagued it for months finally silenced. "You fixed it," Nora said. Fletcher looked up, saw her, and straightened. "Ma'am." The word came out automatically, followed by a salute. Nora returned it. "At ease, Staff Sergeant. I'm not here for an inspection. Just trying to get used to the new rank, ma'am. Still wrapping my head around the fact that you're a colonel." "I've been a colonel for 3 years. I was just wearing different clothes for a couple weeks." Fletcher set down his wrench and wiped his hands on a rag. "Why'd you do it? Go undercover, I mean. You could have just shown up as a colonel, demanded answers, scared everybody into compliance." "Because scared people tell you what you want to hear. Comfortable people tell you the truth." Nora walked closer to the generator, listening to the steady hum. "I needed to see what was really happening here, not the sanitized version that gets briefed up the chain, the actual ground truth." "And what'd you find?" "Good people trying to do their jobs in a broken system, and a couple of bad people exploiting that system for profit." Fletcher nodded slowly. "That tattoo I saw, the one on your arm, that's real?" "Ranger Regiment. Got it after my first deployment. I was young and stupid." "Doesn't seem stupid to me. Seems like you earned it." He paused. "Those guys you arrested today, Thorne and LaRue, they're going away for a long time?" "If I have anything to say about it." "Good, because they weren't just stealing equipment. They were stealing from us. From the soldiers who needed that gear. From the mission." Fletcher's jaw tightened. "That's unforgivable." "I agree." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the generator run. "So what happens now?" Fletcher asked. "You staying or moving on to the next disaster?" "Staying, at least until Fort Sentinel is back to full readiness. After that," Nora shrugged. "Who knows? The Army will send me wherever they need someone to fix things that are broken." "Well, for what it's worth, ma'am, I'm glad you're here. We needed someone like you." "You needed someone to care enough to look past the bullshit. That's all I did." "That's not all you did, ma'am. Not by a long shot." Nora nodded once and turned to leave. "Colonel," Fletcher called after her. She stopped. "Yeah? That thing you did with the convoy, during the storm, that was pretty badass." She smiled. "Just another Tuesday, Staff Sergeant. For you, maybe. For us, it was the first time in months that something actually worked right." Nora walked away across the motor pool yard, boots crunching on gravel, the sunset painting everything in shades of orange and red. Behind her, Generator 2 hummed steadily. No grinding, no stuttering, just the sound of something finally working the way it was supposed to. Small victory. But you built success one small victory at a time. 6 months later, Fort Sentinel looked like a different place. The vehicles in the motor pool ran without breaking down every other day. The communications hub operated at 98% uptime. Supply requisitions that used to take months now took weeks. The base had climbed from the bottom of every readiness metric to the top third. Not perfect, but better. Significantly better. Nora stood in her office on the 3rd floor of Building 6, looking out over the parade ground where everything had come to a head half a year ago. Her office now, not Thorne's. He was in Leavenworth, serving 8 years of a 12-year sentence. LaRue had gotten 10 years after trying to cut a deal that nobody accepted. The door opened behind her. She didn't turn around. "Colonel?" Calloway's voice. "You wanted to see me?" "Come in, Lieutenant Colonel." Calloway had been promoted 2 months ago. Nora had written the recommendation herself and watched with satisfaction as Calloway's superior leadership was finally recognized with the rank it deserved. "What can I do for you, ma'am?" Nora turned from the window. "I'm leaving." Calloway's expression flickered. "When?" "Week after next. Orders came through this morning." "They're sending me to Fort Bragg. Similar situation, different problems." "Another undercover mission?" "Maybe. Maybe not. Depends on what I find when I get there." Nora smiled slightly. "But that's why I wanted to talk to you. You're going to be running this logistics section without me looking over your shoulder. Think you can handle it?" "Yes, ma'am." "I know you can. That's not actually what I was asking. I was asking if you're ready." Calloway thought about that for a moment. "I am. This place isn't perfect, but it's functional now. We've got good systems in place, good people running them. I can keep it going." You can do more than keep it going. You can make it better. Nora walked over to her desk and picked up a folder. I'm recommending you for battalion command. Your leadership over the past 6 months has been exemplary. You've earned it. Calloway took the folder with hands that trembled slightly. Ma'am, I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep pushing. Say you'll keep demanding better. Say you'll never let this place slide back into complacency. I will. I promise. And that's all I need to hear. They stood in silence for a moment. Two officers who'd started as strangers and ended as something closer to friends. Can I ask you something? Calloway said. Why did you care so much? You could have come in, gathered your evidence, made your arrests, and left. You didn't have to stay and help us rebuild. Nora walked back to the window, looked out at the base she'd spent 6 months fixing. 7 years ago, she said quietly, I lost a friend, Captain Lena Fairchild. We served together in Afghanistan. She was killed in an ambush that happened because someone in the supply chain screwed up. The convoy didn't have the right equipment, the vehicles weren't properly maintained, the comms gear failed at the critical moment. She paused. Lena died because someone, somewhere, didn't do their job. Maybe it was incompetence, maybe it was laziness, maybe it was corruption. I never found out which. But I swore that day that I'd never let it happen again, that I'd never let bureaucratic failure cost more good soldiers their lives. She turned to face Calloway. That's why I care. That's why I went undercover. That's why I stayed to help rebuild. Because every piece of equipment that arrives on time, every vehicle that runs properly, every comm system that works when it's needed, that's one less soldier who dies because we failed them. Calloway's eyes were bright. I understand, ma'am, and I'll make sure Fort Sentinel never forgets that lesson. I know you will. Calloway saluted sharply. Nora returned it. Then the lieutenant colonel turned and walked out, leaving Nora alone with her memories and her ghosts. The last day came faster than Nora expected. She spent the morning doing final paperwork, signing off on transition documents, briefing her replacement, a major from the 82nd Airborne who seemed competent but overwhelmed by the responsibility he was inheriting. At 1300 hours, she walked through the logistics office one last time. The desks were still crowded, the phones still rang constantly. But the atmosphere was different now. People worked with purpose instead of resignation. They believed their efforts mattered. That was the real victory. Not the arrests, not the recovered stolen equipment, but the restoration of hope. Brennan met her at the door. Colonel, wanted to say goodbye before you left. How's the comm hub running? Like a Swiss watch. New equipment arrived last month. We've got redundancies on our redundancies now. Next storm won't even make us blink. Good. Keep it that way. Yes, ma'am. He hesitated. For what it's worth, you taught me something. What's that? That the system only works if someone cares enough to make it work. Before you showed up, I'd gotten cynical. Stopped believing things could get better. You reminded me why I put on the uniform in the first place. Nora shook his hand. The system didn't save this base, Sergeant. You did. You and Fletcher and Calloway and all the others who refused to quit even when it would have been easier. I just gave you permission to win. She walked out into the Texas afternoon. The heat was oppressive, but the sky was clear. No storms on the horizon. Fletcher was waiting by her car with Grayson. Both of them stood at attention as she approached. At ease, gentlemen. This isn't a ceremony. Should be, Grayson said. You earned it. I just did my job. Your job was to investigate corruption. You did that in 2 weeks. Then you stayed 6 months to rebuild everything that was broken. That's above and beyond, Colonel. Fletcher handed her a small wooden box. We got you something. Nothing fancy, just wanted you to have something to remember us by. Nora opened the box. Inside was a challenge coin, custom made. One side showed the Fort Sentinel crest. The other side had her name in a simple inscription, the Silent Guardian. I don't know what to say, Nora said quietly. You don't have to say anything, Fletcher replied. Just know that we'll remember what you did here. All of us will. Grayson stepped forward. He was in civilian clothes today, but he still moved like the sergeant major he'd once been. I served 32 years and I met a lot of officers. Most of them were decent. Some were good. A few were exceptional. He met her eyes. You're one of the exceptional ones, Colonel. Don't ever forget that. I won't, Sergeant Major. Thank you. She shook both their hands, climbed into her car, and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, she watched them grow smaller as she drove toward the main gate. The same gate where this had all started 2 weeks and 6 months ago. The same guard shack, different guard, but the same bored expression. This time, though, he checked her ID carefully, saw the rank, straightened immediately, and snapped a sharp salute. "Safe travels, ma'am." "Thank you, soldier." She drove through the gate and onto the highway that would take her away from Fort Sentinel and toward whatever came next. Her phone rang. She answered on Bluetooth. "Colonel Blackwell?" "Colonel, this is General Morrison, the two-star who'd sent her here in the first place. I heard you're leaving Fort Sentinel today." "Yes, sir. En route to Fort Bragg now." "Good. We've got another situation there. Similar issues, different players. I'm sending you the classified brief tonight." "Understood, sir. Same parameters as last time?" "Actually, no. This time you're going in as yourself. We need someone to take command of their logistics battalion and clean house from the top down. No undercover work. Just straight leadership." Nora thought about that. Part of her would miss the undercover work, the challenge of operating in the shadows, the satisfaction of catching people who thought they were untouchable. But another part of her was relieved, because at the end of the day, she was a soldier, and soldiers were meant to lead from the front, not from the shadows. "Roger that, sir. I'll be ready." "I know you will." Morrison out. The line went dead. Nora drove on through the Texas plains. The sun was setting behind her, painting the sky in colors that reminded her of fire and blood and all the things she'd seen in too many countries. But ahead of her, the road stretched clean and clear into the gathering darkness. Another base, another fight, another chance to make sure no soldier died because someone didn't do their job. She'd promised Lena that much, and Nora Blackwell always kept her promises. The work was never finished, but neither was she.